wanted to say thanks again for joining us on today's RVA Tech It Yourself webinar. Appreciate you all spending your lunchtime with us. Today's session, we have Ethics in Machine Learning and Artificial Intelligence, presented by T.I.Y. But first and foremost, I want to thank our sponsor for today's session, Corgi Bytes. If you're not familiar with Corgi Bytes, they are really good at transforming broken systems. They modernize code through continuous improvement and marginal gains and apply these same practices to systems of social oppression. Similar to how technical debt makes a code base difficult to work with, there are institutional barriers for some individuals that have accumulated over time. Blindly operating within these structures hurts people and prevents organizations from benefiting from the wide range of perspectives needed to thrive. There's a lot of opportunity for improvement, and they use their core values and their talents as mentors to have a positive impact on our society. So thanks so much to Corgi Bytes for supporting the RVA Tech It Yourself webinar series, and specifically our event here today. And of course, we have Andrea Goulet, who will be moderating from Corgi Bytes. But first and foremost, I want to talk a little bit about our presenter or our speaker today, T.I.Y. She is the AI ML ethics lead at Amazon Web Services. Dia has worked in technology for 25 years, building, operating, and delivering and leading in early and growth stage companies. She has a passion for developing current and emerging leaders, promoting STEM to the underrepresented, and driving diversity, equity, and inclusion. After spending years in technology-focused roles and separately pursuing passion projects in DEI, she now has the perfect role marrying the best of both worlds as the first AI ML ethicist at Amazon Web Services. In this capacity, she is responsible for defining strategy and standards to guide consultants and customers in building diverse teams to drive AI initiatives, elevate potential areas of bias and risk to reduce unintended impacts, often affecting marginalized communities. So with that, I will pass it over to our moderator today, Andrea Goulet, and of course, T.I.Y. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you, Nick. And welcome, everybody. It's so great to have you here. I did post in the chat. If you do have questions, you can use the Q&A feature or the chat, and I'll do my best to try to incorporate things. But Dia, this is wonderful to have you here. I know you and I have had a chance to catch up a few times and have had some really great conversations. So I'm excited to open this up and chat about this really, really important topic.
And thank you so much for having me as well. I am looking forward to our discussion today. I was joking right before and said we're just going to have a chat just like we've had in the past, and hopefully we have a circle of individuals that get to experience and enjoy a little bit of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So tell us a little bit kind of about your background. So, what was your path to becoming the first AI ML ethicist at AWS? And tell us a little bit too about what that role means.
Yeah, so I guess I'll take a step back for a moment and just give you a brief sort of history. And I'd like to share this, and you'll probably figure out a little bit why as we go into some of our other conversation. But, I grew up in the Bronx. And so, we weren't necessarily a family with, great means, but I received a computer in the 3rd grade. And that computer for me was what changed my life. Right, in terms of having access to technology and now beginning to experience and learn about that. And so I set in my mind at that time to want to be a computer engineer. And I've pretty much stayed in technology since then. I went to boarding school, and then I went to Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, and graduated with a computer science degree. So you would probably say this is somewhat of a traditional path on your way to being in data science, but I worked in technology, but not necessarily data science, and then because of an interest in wanting to make sure that I was really building into and preparing my sons for their future. I have 2 young boys. I started looking at, are we really considering the kinds of things that they need to know? And more, I started finding myself looking at automation, artificial intelligence, and it's shaping and shifting, our future, the future workforce and the jobs that are going to be available to folks. And so that interest for me and really preparing my sons and thinking about my nieces and nephews and what they needed to learn really is what drove me into an interest in artificial intelligence and ethics specifically, because realizing how things are going to shift, the landscape, our technology, how we work, how we live is shifting. It became more clear to me that we had an absence of regulation, structures that really were going to govern how we use the technology. And it's already being used a lot now. At the time that I was looking at this a few years ago, and um, so that interest in ethics grew. So from there, I started following people like Joy Bulamami and Timnit Gubru and Renee Cummings, and I took some classes at MIT and Harvard and Kellogg School of Management in ethics and artificial intelligence. Uh, Partnered with a couple of individuals that have been instrumental in kind of having think tank conversations, like Swati Young, and got a mentor, Reed Black, who is an ethicist as well with Virtue Consultants, and they really helped sort of shift me into an area of focus, a path, if you will, around ethics. And then, at AWS and in Amazon, we have this interesting way where you can present new ideas and have an opportunity to explore those. And so I did that and had some conversations that really led to an opportunity to introduce this area of focus. I will say that there are teams like Amazon Science and some of our service teams that are working in this capacity, looking at, areas to improve our technology and how we introduce fairness into our systems. But this is a customer facing, sort of function where we get to really help infuse best practices and start to introduce really a way of our customers looking at how they leverage technology, AI, ML in a more responsible way.
Awesome. For those people who may not have a computer science background, can you explain a little bit about maybe the differences between artificial intelligence and machine learning and some of these terms? And then also, how are they being used? Why are they so important?
Yeah, so I guess to start off with, I know most people think about artificial intelligence and immediately, go to Ex Machina or Terminator or that new series that's on one of the networks called Next, right? And that's really talking about sort of these systems that have grown to be smart, replicating human intelligence and being able to think and reason and even become more smart than individuals and sort of take their own path, right? And that kind of technology, although it does not exist in that structure, is what we would call sort of artificial intelligence or general or strong AI. And then you have what people would call weak AI, where, it's artificial intelligence, thinking that really is driving towards a specific task, has a narrow defined focus. And, things like your personal assistant, Siri or Alexa, those would be the kind of sort of examples of narrow AI. And then from the machine learning context, that's really where we start to look at, how do you train and leverage data in order to adapt and to infer, specific ideas or concepts from large data sets.
Awesome.
So why is it important? Um, it's important because it's being used everywhere. And I think, we're paying a lot more attention to it now, but it's been being used for a while. I was looking at something recently, and they were actually talking about in 1988, there were in the UK, there was a study and some concerns raised, a legal situation where an institution was, actually picking students using artificial intelligence, right? So these kinds of scenarios are not new to us, but they're much more prevalent, right? They're happening or are being used more and more. And the more that we go to digital formats and are amassing large amounts of data, the more that we see systems being driven by artificial intelligence and automation, making decisions, being, used. And so it's important because it has the potential of changing the face of things. It's important because it is coming in places and spaces, that we may not have been aware of. It's important because there are industries that are being shifted and changed, dramatically as a result of the use of the technology. It's also, I guess, important in some ways because it's reshaping um, how we engage. And I think, that's also part of the risk, right? Because there is a part where we don't realize how much it is being used and how much artificial intelligence starts to infuse or, particular thoughts or guides our directions and our patterns and the way that we do things. We were talking, it's like how, my son and I, or you and I, can search for the same thing and get different results. And then as a result of that continued profile proliferating through different systems, you go to other social sites, you search for something, looking for a home, and all of that is, driven by data and a profile that gets created for you. And so I think that's like kind of, some of the more, it is some of the less obvious ways that it's being used, but then you have, everything else from, there's a new commercial that I like with Delta Sync. And it's like their intelligent sync that you can actually speak to. And I keep saying that I want that, right? That and like the Samsung refrigerator that you can now plan your meals and keep track of your food inventory, right? Like those are probably extreme things that we think about in some ways, but those are ways that AI is being infused into everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that we had talked about in some of our previous conversations is that there's kind of two views of AI. There are people like Elon Musk, for example, who is very much on the dystopian side of AI, and something that we really, really need to pay attention to, and that it's going to cause a lot of harm. But then there's also this optimistic side. So maybe what are kind of those two extremes as to why we need to be very cautious, but then why we can be optimistic, and then where do you consider yourself on that scale?
Yeah, you know what? It's interesting you bring up Elon Musk and him saying that we need regulation. I don't think that he's against it, though, right? I mean,
Mm,
individuals like him are leveraging artificial intelligence in the cars that he's been producing, and a lot of his other sort of activities on the edge. But regulation is needed, and
mhm.
it's because it has the potential to impact and change things in such dramatic ways, right? When we think about the disruption of jobs, right, and that shift from low skilled, uh, low paid works being repetitive and those being removed, and we think about perspectives that are being narrowed, like we were just describing, as a result, or profiles being created and narrowed, and then proliferating through multiple systems that drive how we get jobs or how we, people are uh, made available for credit or buying their homes. All of that, you know, uh, are reasons for concern. And the bigger concern is that there are unintended consequences, or that these systems have the ability or the potential, and not just the potential, they are doing this, right? Perpetuating harms and systemic inequities that have existed. Um, if you think about some of the worst sort of ills around humanity in terms of racism or sexism, those all have the impact of being exacerbated in the context of artificial intelligence. Um, and as a Black woman, as in technology, I have very, I get severe concerns, if you will. Even though I'm in the space and I tend to be optimistic about artificial intelligence and what technology can do, we also realize that we've had a system that has, infused systemic inequalities and sought to marginalize individuals for a very long time. So we start off with things like slavery from 1619 to 1865, and then afterwards you have things like Jim Crow and convict leasing and all of these things sort of institutionalized marginalization for people of color. And they were the base system structures, policies that we're still governing by and still making business decisions by and still driving credit decisions by. And so if you think about that and then realize that we're gonna then automate and then drive and leverage that data that historically has now, leveraged all of this inequity, and then drive that into how we make future decisions even more, and put the potential of them removing humans, in some ways from those processes. What does that mean for us, right? And so those, I think, are the areas where the concerns become even greater. How do we, leverage technology in a way so that we're not perpetuating those same biases that have been ingrained into the systems, but only have the potential of being exacerbated with artificial intelligence. And so that's where the concerns come. And I'll be honest, the concern is not just with people of color, it's not just for women, but when I think about the kind of disadvantage that has long afflicted people of color, when Black people, you have to be concerned, right? Who else is going to want to trade the history that we've had with their own culture's history? No one, because they recognize how difficult or how many atrocities were rooted in that period that now have been propagated for years, right? For years. It's not stopped. Yes, it has, slavery and subjugation in a different context or in a different color or a different name, but it's still happening. And so we've got to be concerned about these systems being used en masse, the technology driving and perpetuating bias. And so yes, concern. I think part of the reason why, I'm in technology and of course, looking at working in this capacity is because I also believe there's, opportunity for us to make a shift, right? To address some of those, to level the playing field. And it can't be done absent of people like myself, Black and brown individuals, women, other perspectives being involved. And so optimistic, right? But I guess the words would be cautiously optimistic, right?
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot to be done and a lot that we need to do in order to really ensure that we're not propagating the bias, stop where those practices have already begun, and then look at ways that we can actually begin to provide opportunity and access to those that normally wouldn't have had it.
Yeah. Yeah, when you're talking, I think, one of the concepts in software is that the first decisions are the hardest to change. Because like you said, then you build upon that. And so then when you go back and want to amend and shift, it's like it is a significant lift. What are some of the things, like, more concretely that people can do? Like, I'm thinking, one of the things that I'm seeing that, we're advising our clients on as well is that if you see an opportunity to make things better, do it, right? Do it right then. Don't just accept it. And I think, in the software space, what we're seeing is, the metaphor of master slave, for example, that has been kind of a thing that it's a metaphor, and we're saying, no longer. We're going to take the time and the effort to go back through and change everything, even though it's a significant investment. Are there things like that, or things, other kind of more concrete and tangible things that people who are working in software can do to course correct and make things better and stop perpetuating those biases?
Yeah, so let me say something first. And you talked about like it's hard to course correct or to go back. That's also part of the challenge here, right? Is that the train has already left the station.
Yeah.
um, it is being used, artificial intelligence, machine learning, it's being used in mass in so many ways right now, whether that is like we were just describing, when you go to get buy something on Amazon or any other site, right? Those preferences that you get. And that's how, many of these sort of things originated, with the interest of ensuring that you had, we could model or provide, preferences and things that were amenable or desirable to you, right? There's so many of those sort of nuances, or those examples where artificial intelligence is infused into so many things we don't realize it. Well, not only don't realize it, but it's harder now to go back and change that. How do we change? And we all love the opportunity to, and I'm using a simple situation, but we all love the fact, or many of us do, the fact that we get recommendations, right, for stuff. I'm like, oh, that's great. I probably want to get that too when we go to buy something. But then that's also narrowing the scope of the things that I might see, right? And so that's not ideal. So I think part of the challenge is that the train has left the station. We're already using it. We've already made some, massive strides in movement. That doesn't mean that we can't, course correct, or we can't fix those, but it just means there's a lot more unwielding and work to be done. It is very much like, handling technical debt, right? Trying to make the shift to move to a new operating model, a new sort of paradigm is challenging when you still have all of this stuff and it's functioning and serving a purpose, right? So that's the first thing. But I think that one of the first things that I like to talk about when we talk about like practical things to do, and this is not just software developers, but organizations, companies, is who's in the room, right? Who is making decisions about the design, the problems we're solving, the approach that we're taking. And for me, that's one of the first sort of things that we have to tackle, right? Representation matters. And so the difference of the lived experiences of other people and other perspectives makes a difference. And that means that we need Black and Brown people in the room. That means that we need someone to be considering the challenges that someone who is not able-bodied might have. That means that we need to be thinking about bringing individuals in who have different sexual preferences than I do, right? Like those perspectives actually can make a difference in some of the solutions that are being devised. And in particular, when we talk about, technology like the way AI is being used with recidivism or other things like that, people are not considering what the impact of that is, or even any of the historical context that makes some of those choices even more challenging, right? And so the first thing is, getting other individuals, other perspectives to be a part of that process. We talk about cross-functional teams and having people from business and others that are partnering with data scientists and others that are making those decisions. But I think that it also means that the decision makers have to be diverse. And I posted something recently talking about the 1% of people of color, Black and Brown, that are in artificial intelligence, or at least that's one of the last statistics I saw, right? We've got to do more to ensure, one, that we're providing educational opportunity to people of color, Brown and Black, so that they actually can come into the fold, that we actually hire, individuals so that they are have a place and a seat at the table. And that we also leverage, think tanks and other groups like that, where we may not have direct influence to really help them influence choices and decisions that we're making, right? That's like, to me, ground zero, right? Bringing in diversity. Other things is oftentimes our developers aren't thinking about the context of bias, right? And so that's where education is important, right? That they are starting to understand that there is a context, there are biases, and I mean, of course, we talk about considering the use case. Not everything is a great use case for artificial intelligence, and are we willing to make that choice and sort of shift? Not allowing or not resting in the sole decision of machines, right? Like ensuring that we have humans in the loop, that we're involving individuals either to review and evaluate or to be able to, make final decisions and determinations. Ensuring that there is transparency, right? So that and explainability, so we understand the decisions that are being made by the technology or by the models. And those are all, I think, things that uh, we can do. And now there are tools that are being created, right, that'll help us look at bias. And bias comes in different, contexts. I was doing a little study, and I, came across, it was like 10 different, biases. And you start to think about, like, how do you address them all? And of course, there are ways, but we look to confirm our bias, right? And so now you need other perspectives. That's why other perspectives are critical, so that we're not just sort of sitting in our echo chamber of our own thoughts and perspectives. We're bringing others in. And so those are the kinds of things I think are, initial steps that we began to take to address the bias or address the inequity and create an environment for us to build more responsible technology.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. So I've got a question here from Kim Mahan, who is our outgoing board chair, who has really supported a lot of these initiatives and also runs Max Potential here in doing a lot of those training. And she asks, you mentioned the lack of regulation in AI and ML, and it seems that technology is far outpacing the ability of people who don't build software or understand technology on that deep level, and lawmakers to understand it. And are you aware of any of the regulatory efforts or best practices that are emerging and kind of the governance side of things to help make sure that we are doing the best we can?
Yeah, I mean, there are tons. I would say there's not. And the statement that she made is 100% accurate, right? Like technology is moving at a much faster pace than our our efforts to really bring in regulation and government oversight. And there are a lot of people that are proponents of ensuring that we have that. um, there is, quite a bit in the way of policies that are being enacted in order to ensure that there is some. Now, these are not like government sort of, in most cases, these are not, strict policies, but guidelines or frameworks that are being established in order to ensure that there is some more, you know, um, consideration given. You have like in what is it? In there is a policy in Canada that was created. You have playbooks coming out with in what is it? There's a mitigating bias playbook that was established. You have organizations that are now ensuring that there is, greater policy. Uh, there in Canada, there is a policy as well that's being established. Not again frameworks that they're attempting to ensure that we really promote more ethical and responsible use. The regulation really does have to catch up, and that's why ensuring that we are participating in policy creation and working with other entities to ensure that we have them is critical. Beijing has also an AI principles document that was established early in May 20, I think it was like 2019. And those were principles for research and development. Um, in the European Commission, I think it was as well, they have an ethical guideline for trustworthy AI. So these are not, again, policies that are being established to ensure that we have some robustness and safety. But the other piece of that is really, moving to the degree that we have the kind of governance that is necessary. There probably, I want to say the last time I saw some documentation, there was something in the order of like 80 different are ethical guidelines that have been established. Another one is Montreal Declaration. That's one. Similar AI principles and Toronto Declaration. So these are all, again, principles that are being structured or constructed to help guide people better. The other piece of that is really like the reinforcement or the enforcement to ensure that people and institutions are actually leveraging them and adhering to those guidelines. And that still does not exist as much.
So Gwendolyn Robinson has a question about being a teacher of elementary students and what can they do to get younger people interested in this field to ensure the future that we have more diversity in the room and we have more perspectives.
And there are, there are some great like little toolkits. There's a group that I like, and one of my first talks about artificial intelligence or ethics and really like the shape of the future was with a group called Tech for the Women in Tech Summit, and they sponsor a group called Tech Girls who actually create content for us to be able to deliver to young girls to expose them to technology. And so I think organizations like that, and there are others. I happen to like that one, so I mentioned that one. But
that was actually how we
others,
connected, was through WITS.
That's right.
So,
Like, there are others that are really taking up the charge to create curriculum that is being offered free to expose our children at earlier stages to the technology. And I think we have an easy way in because many of them are already engaged in using technology in different ways. And so we could be very creative about some of the ways that we expose them. I think we need change in policy when we're talking about policy in terms of how we build systems and how we leverage those. I think we also need change in policy around what we're teaching in schools so that we begin to infuse more of this technology into part of the curriculum so that they are getting opportunities to learn about that earlier. And I think it's important, again, like we were talking about, exposure, getting access to a computer early helped to shape my opinion because early images may not have presented me with an idea of being in computers. We need to be doing the same things, right? Showing and exposing our children to other, opportunities. And when that goes into our school systems and when we start teaching that more at the higher levels, then we get to sort of present another potential future for them. And then we got to be thinking about like what other skills do we teach them, right? Because those the repetitive tasks like we were describing are things that are going to be automated, and so you don't want them necessarily to be the radiologist, but you want them to be the doctor, right? Like not the one that's reading the X-rays, but the one that's helping to drive and make decisions. And so having that perspective to begin to share with our students and help guide them. And of course, there's always going to be niche sort of subject matter expertise that will continue to be required and needed. But I think it's creating and taking advantage of opportunities and organizations that have learning content that we can now expose our students to when it's not in the schools until it gets in the schools.
Yeah.
Is important.
Yeah, and there's a really great nonprofit here in locally called Code Virginia. And so Rebecca Dovey and Chris Dovey. Rebecca Dovey was actually my computer science teacher in high school way back when. But that's their entire purpose, is to help teach teachers on how to teach computer science. And they've worked with the Virginia legislature to change some of the legislation around computer science principles and having it being woven into more curriculum. So yeah, for teachers, that's a great resource too.
And at Amazon, so AWS Educate is one of the programs that is also providing, context for schools to partner and get cloud and other technology experience and bring those into schools. And those are programs that can be leveraged as well. Again, I mentioned Tech Girls is probably like a little bit of a plug for them because I like that organization, but they're not the only one that's doing things like that. And looking for those kind of opportunities is great.
Yeah, awesome. So one question I think is on a lot of people's minds is facial recognition. We see that a lot in the news. And so Teresa wants to know, is the risk of using facial recognition, knowing some of the challenges, what are the kind of the risks and the benefits there?
Yeah. Um, I probably rest more on the side of, acknowledging the risk, right? And I heard someone talk recently, and she was, talking about, more of the use of facial recognition and in Africa, and that being leveraged with the digital IDs and really bringing opportunity into the region. And so I don't want to dismiss the potential of, there being opportunity. We also know that facial recognition has been used in order to, find people in sex trafficking, and so there is, there certainly is a positive or element to that. I think that when, again, we go back to some of the historical context and some of the concerns that we're talking about, when facial recognition does not have the degree of um, what's the word that I want to use, um, where there is challenges with it being able to recognize Black and brown faces, women more than men. I mean, those are concerns that, introduce, in particular use cases that really introduce greater risk to marginalizing communities. And so you have to ask the question, right? Again, is it worth us continuing to have this impact on particular uh, group versus weighing the benefits? And so again, when I was talking about earlier, is every use case the right use case for the technology? There's a group that was talking about using image recognition for, like, finding pets, right? Their sort of use case or consideration, maybe that's a safe one. But when we're talking about, matching that to make determinations for that would end up, in life circumstances, causing a person of color, to be unlawfully or unneedlessly detained, then that's a situation that we don't want. And the UK, the watchdog, they showed a great sort of example of this, right, where they have image recognition being used on the street, surveillance cameras, and they picked up a 14-year-old boy, Black boy, and pulled him aside and had him searched and all this other kind of stuff, wrongfully matched, right? And because those kinds of things happen so much to Black and brown individuals, right? This to me is an opportunity for us to say, that's not a good use case, and this is and this is not where we should be using them. And so we talk about, like, opportunities to level the playing field. Well, maybe that's not entirely leveling the playing field, but it's easy for us to say, like, that type of scenario is not one that we want. And when we recognize that it has the potential to impact a community like that is already over policed, right? That is already, has so many more numbers of individuals going to jail, which already has a school to prison pipeline that is adversely impacting people of color. No, that's not that to me, the benefit does not outweigh the risk.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So Alex Morrison has a question about, what changes do you see that we can start right now to fight systemic bias?
That's a great question. I mean, and the changes are, right, like having, so when I was talking about, like, some of the historic and systemic things, right? I think one of the first challenges we have is that some people don't think those things exist, right? Like, even with all that we've seen, even with the experiences that we've heard, even with the climate that we've just experienced, after George Floyd and Tawana, uh, people don't, some people don't think that those systemic inequities exist. And so part of, like, the first part of the challenge and being able to shift and sort of, make a change is is the growing awareness that this really is an issue, right? That we really do have a challenge. And unfortunately, that usually rests on the shoulders of folks like myself and others, and the 10-minute gurus of the world and others, really to like elevate and raise their voices so that people recognize that that's an issue. Um, and so I think, like, that first part is about education and awareness and accepting, because part of the acceptance is also like having to grapple with um, our part in that history, right?
Yeah.
Or that part of being willing to benefit from that history and not make a change. So I think that that's one of the first things. And then it is what we were just describing, making a little earlier, making those kinds of conscious choices to bring in different voices um, into into organizations that are going to help make decisions about the technology, that are going to help to build the systems, right? I think that has a huge, or creates a huge opportunity for us to shift some of those. The willingness of organizations like this and others to actually have the conversation and expose what has been happening and what the technology has the potential to do, I think is huge. And so those are some of like the one, two, three things, or advocating for um, common sense policy, right, to be enacted, supporting individuals, although we don't hear a lot from some of our officials, but supporting and encouraging our officials to actually support technology in this area. We also, I think, need some individuals in some of the organizations to really have a good understanding of kind of the way and the direction of technology, because sometimes we don't see that, right? That some of our politicians don't have a good perspective, right? But bringing those um, individuals or supporting individuals that have a mind to really help in that policy, I think that's huge too, because we, in addition to bringing in diverse voices and doing the technical things to start to implement a more responsible AI, we still need policy, right? We still need to address the more systemic things that occur. Like we can, put in safe fail safes and get additional data to model off after. But when we still have systemic things, right? That's only part of the puzzle. And so being willing to be aware, conscious of, and start to address some of those other systemic things, I think have to be done as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. I think, when Nick read off the Core Rights commitment statement, he mentioned marginal gains and continuous improvement. And that's kind of how we transform software systems, but then also applying that too. So, some of the concrete things are exactly like you're talking about, like getting really smart, doing research, and then noticing. And if you can make a difference, even if it's a small difference, if enough people do that action, then you can have a pretty big impact and you can transform a system pretty quickly. So those are two principles that we've used as well. Would you agree kind of sometimes we think of things as like, oh, I need to do this big sweeping thing, but it can be something that's small and right in front of you.
And everybody can play a part, right?
Yeah.
Like that. I did hear someone say, like, having ethical AI is everyone's part, right?
Yes.
It is challenging the decisions of the systems. It's asking questions about, our organization or teams that are doing that. It is the developers thinking about ways that they can, infuse or ensure that we are looking at diverse data sets. It is ensuring that we have data sets that are more representative and not just going on some of the historical context, right? It is addressing the implicit biases and being aware of those and infusing other people into the conversation. All of those are the small steps that we all can take a part in. And like we were just describing, holding people accountable, looking for individuals with voices that are going to be committed to seeing a change or driving a change or being a part of the revolution. We talk about AI as being like the digital revolution. I think the other part of the revolution is challenging us to do the right things with technology or with AI in this season.
Yeah.
And we all can take a part of that.
Yeah.
And there are tons of voices, not just those that I've mentioned, that are also, doing some great work in this space, whose voices also need to be, elevated, and we need to support so that we can see, shifts in organizations.
Yeah. Brandon Middleton has a really great question about the role of media. So he says, or they say, I recently watched Coded Bias from Joy. I don't know how to say the last name. I am so sorry. Boulamwini. I am so sorry that I have not said that correctly, I know. And is a big advocate of documentary film and media being used as an avenue for education. And so what are your thoughts on the media industry backing civic film projects like this that allow us to learn and grow together and have some of these dialogues?
Yeah. So Coded Bias is one, and then what's the other one? That was out earlier a couple of months ago, and that everybody was talking about. Absolutely, I think that we need more, more of the media sort of supporting, elevating those documentaries. I'm drawing a blank on the one we were talking about this earlier.
Oh, was it The Social Dilemma on
Social
Netflix?
Dilemma, right?
Yeah.
Those are
Yeah.
all really, really great for folks to get an understanding. I mean, it's a little frightening for some individuals, right? To see or to get a context for what's happening, but that's the real side of artificial intelligence, machine learning. It is not like the rogue machine, going to kill us. It is those things that we're talking about infused into our systems, driving conversations. And so if we can get organizations, or if we can get media really carrying and supporting that kind of content and helping to produce it, I think it's great. And it's great in illuminating people to, or creating an awareness.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the other thing, it starts to force people to feel like they have to be accountable because it's been exposed, right? And so some things you can't, and a lot of what is happening currently, and more folks being focused in AI ethics, the conversations that are happening are because of projects like those documentaries that are building the awareness for folks, and calling companies to account, right?
Yeah.
It was Joy's work, that's forced some of our companies, including ours, to look at what the image recognition was doing, and it is that sort of illumination of um, of the problem and current state that creates an opportunity for us to more broadly address it. When it's hidden, we can kind of fly under the radar, but now that
Yeah.
that's being exposed, it really, we have some greater accountability.
Yeah. I think too about Netflix, and I know it was 2 or 3 years ago that they created a role and invited Vernee Myers, who speaks a lot about unconscious bias
Yes.
and driving solutions forward. And she's now the VP of Inclusion Strategy. And so, how do we get communities to tell their own stories rather than having the perspective of another culture kind of then told? And it's interesting because I have seen a shift in kind of the content of Netflix. And so that's another thing too, is, creating roles where people can help guide these conversations, similar to how you've created your role, where it's like, let's hold ourselves accountable from the inside. Let's really have these conversations because they're so important.
And the great thing is that we have at Amazon, we have leadership principles that talk about us, bringing diverse perspectives. Or one of our leadership principles, in particular, I read a lot about bringing leaders, or diverse perspectives, and so we have an opportunity to sort of leverage those and guide us, and having these conversations and challenging us to ensure that those perspectives are at the table as we're building technology. And that's also one of the things that we talk about, or one of the approaches when we're having this conversation with other customers as well. What are your guiding principles? What are your core values? Are the systems and the things that you're designing aligning with those, even with the unintended impacts? Are you considering that the unintended impact may impact or affect your ability to really live out your
Yeah.
core values in the way that you said, and challenge them to think about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll take one more question kind of from the audience. Alex Morrison has a really interesting question about how can we hold, or can we hold a machine liable? Or can we hold the developer liable for bias, or a data scientist liable? So this idea of accountability, who are the people? I mean, everyone is accountable for being part of the solution, but if something goes wrong, who is the person that really is responsible for this at the end of the day?
I think it's an interesting question, and I think there are a couple of perspectives with regards to that, or two sides of thought. One, of course, in what developer wants to be held responsible for that decision. I think perhaps making them responsible would would require or enforce some level of accountability or additional sort of responsibility in terms of what they develop. But I mean, typically when we're building systems, and you're a developer and have done some development work as well, um, are you really, like, your piece of code, are you really liable, or is the organization for whom you built that
Yes.
ultimately liable? um, the question of, like, who's responsible beyond the developer, like the machine or the organization, is at the heart of some of these questions. In There was a robot, I think, I want to say, I'm trying to remember where it was, and they were talking about giving the robot rights, right? And trying to make this robot a citizen, right? And so the question, and there was this huge debate about that, because then if you make it a citizen and have it in this context, then are they liable, for the decisions they make and that sort of thing? And I think that that's still, part of the conversation. I believe ultimately, it's the organization, right? It is the organizations that are establishing these, and so I think that's why we have to companies, institutions that are building this have to really, take into account more of the implications that these systems have or can bring.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen some debate there about almost having developers take kind of a version of the Hippocratic Oath that doctors are held up
Yeah.
to, where
Mm.
it's like do no harm, and then that makes you think about the decision. So that maybe internally is kind of one thing, but from a regulatory standpoint, I would agree with you. I think it's ultimately an organization, and because
We
there's
probably
so
would have
many
no
different
developers
things.
building anything if we actually made them
Yeah.
make
Yeah.
them all liable. But I think it's again, it's an interesting concept, like you were talking about, taking an oath to ensure that. It would force you to think a little bit differently, I think, about what you're implementing. But then you also have to have a system, a structure that allows you to respond, or the culture that would allow you to respond in a way to say, no, I'm not doing this, or this has a concern, and elevate that. And I think so that some of the cultural things organizations would need if we made that shift too. But again, I think ultimately, just like other technology, it's not usually the developer, it's the organization
Yeah.
that owns the liability.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll mention to Casey Quinlan, who's a frequent person who attends these, and love you, Casey, shares Arthur Ashe's quote, which Arthur Ashe we have a fondness for here
Yes,
in Richmond, of
that's
start where you
it.
are, use what you have, and do what you can.
That's
So Dia, to kind of wrap up, we've got just a few minutes left, but, kind of as you look towards the future, what do you see? Where do you think that AI and ML will take us? And then what are some things that we can do to make sure that we stay on this right path and that we stay aware?
yeah. Where can it take us? I think there is, we're probably saying the wrong thing, but, or saying this in the wrong way, but unlimited potential, right? I mean, there is a ton of opportunity with the technology, right? And again, I still am a proponent that there is a great opportunity to do good, and we're seeing that in many cases, or in many circumstances, whether that is creating opportunity for people in 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 Africa, or helping to expose or create opportunity for other individuals, or even with creating the vaccine for coronavirus, right? Like that was done with our systems, and in with artificial intelligence, helping to establish that. And so there's huge opportunity. I see the possibility of it leveling, and creating baselines when we talk about medicine being prescribed to individuals unfairly, and being able to ensure that there is fairness there. I mean, long term, I mean, it would be my hope that we allow the technology and put in the kind of structure so that it actually levels the playing field and creates equitable situations or circumstances for those that have been marginalized and disenfranchised. Uh, I, I think that's possible. Of course, that requires a lot of undoing and all the things that we talked about earlier to ensure that that comes to pass. I mean, the steps to the future are the things that we were just describing. How do we support people who have diverse perspectives? How do we bring them to the table and ensure that they have a voice and are part of those decisions as we drive technology? Being aware and becoming more educated. Those that have responsibility for development, really taking that some of the responsibility and ownership to ensure that we're introducing fairness and transparency. Those are the kinds of things. And then we get to be in organizations and companies that hopefully will take those same kinds of focus and attention to ensure that we are, more responsibly applying the artificial intelligence that we create.
Yeah. Thank you so, so much for sharing your wisdom and your time and your experience. I'm getting a
Thank
lot of
you.
comments about how productive and how people are walking away feeling like they've really learned something, and I have too. And thank you just for being a leader in this and really, holding us all accountable so that we can do better. So I'll toss it back over to you, Nick, but thank you again, Dia.
Thanks
Great
for having me in
conversation.
here. We'll be talking again.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Dia, and of course, thanks, Andrea, for moderating and helping us out with all the Q&A. It was a fantastic session, and thank all of you for attending and spending your lunch hour with us here at RVA Tech. We have one more webinar for the year coming up next week about policy and the state budget. A little bit of a different topic, but if that's your jam, then join us on the 17th at the same time. So we will let you go for now, but hopefully we'll see you next week. And thanks again for attending RVA Tech's Tech It Yourself webinar series. Thanks so much, everyone.